Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today was day 39 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings, and the day started off kind of slow, really, but it gathered some steam in the afternoon. We saw an outburst and a walkout by a couple of the family participants, and then it really had the heat turned up in the later part of the afternoon when there was a presentation on some of the communications going on behind the scenes within the RCMP ranks and some references to the Prime Minister, Federal Public Safety Minister, and some of the urgings and suggestions that they had as far as public communications go. And really something that strikes to the heart of why the RCMP is under such scrutiny and is taking some real damaging hits as a result of their own behavior. So I'll get to that in my description, but I'll start with the first part of the day, which was a presentation by Mass Casualty Commission lawyer Gillian Nattau. I think we've seen before, but it's hard to keep track of all of the lawyers for the commission at times. She started out by giving a presentation on support services that were available to victims and victims' family members. After the shootings, there was this is all done through victim services run through the Department of Justice, the Provincial Department of Justice, and they have what's called a criminal injuries counseling program. And the report suggested that 189 files had been opened and up to $500,000 was awarded, but only a quarter of that amount has actually been used by people that have been able to connect with a counselor and receive some help that way. A couple of the issues seem to be, one is that the maximum rate that the program pays is $85 an hour. I understand many counselors would be more than that, 100, 150, depending on where you go. Although certainly I'm sure some must have taken the 85, which isn't that bad of a rate. Although some have had to top up of their own resources. But the other issue is just finding a counselor that is qualified to handle this kind of a case. And I think that seems to be the issue with such a small uptake in people receiving the service. Or maybe they just weren't finding it helpful. It wasn't quite clear from the presentation what the reason was, so a little bit of speculation there. There were 271 RCMP members involved in the response to the mass casualty. Of those, 70 took sick leave of some duration. Interesting. That seems like a lot, and it is, I think, but we also heard from Corporal Mills that he didn't think there was a great deal of support for the ERT squad members in particular, who were kind of forced to go back to work. But certainly some were able to take some leave. Other officers were brought in from Ontario and Quebec, which unfortunately caused somewhat of a COVID-19 outbreak at the time within the RCMP ranks here and caused some other strains and stresses on the ability to police Nova Scotia. There was some discussion as well about some fundraising efforts that were done privately, vigils and GoFundMe pages for the victims' families and such. So there was some discussion of that first thing in the morning. Then we had a witness, and that witness was the family liaison officer for the RCMP, and his name is Constable Wayne Skipper Bent. Now, the skipper part was in his actual title, and on it. I always think if your nickname is established well enough, particularly a fun name like Skipper, that you must be a likable person. Probably a good person for the family liaison role, although there were some criticisms of him as well, and as I'll get to, some of the family members had a big problem with Constable Bent. Really no role definition for the family liaison officer. Really, it's supposed to be a communications role, but in Constable Bent's case, turned into much more. I mean, he was dealing with trying to arrange for the homes to be cleaned, dealing with pets and other animals, dealing with insurance companies, helping out people with their claims, just trying to, in his words, trying to help people in whatever way possible. He was actually part of the major crimes unit and was in, he was the family liaison officer, but he was also sent in to do some policing work. In addition to that, he was sent in, I think he found the body of Emily Tuck. He also went to the home of the Bonds. That was a bit of an issue because we heard from Nick Dorrington that he drove by on the Sunday morning and didn't notice the door ajar at the Bonds home, which is in Cobequid Court at the southern water side of the community. But then when Constable Bent arrived, his observation was that the door was open and actually that Peter Bond was laying in the doorway. So hard to know if there's a real contradiction there, but perhaps Constable Dorrington just really didn't see it. But in any event, that's something that council may pick up on. The difficult part was in cross-examination. Michael Scott from Patterson Law, who represents Nick Beaton, among others, was asking about the vehicle search of Kristen Beaton and then giving the vehicle back. And there's some discrepancies, it seems, there from what Constable Bent was saying and what Nick Beaton remembers from the interactions. A couple of things. One is giving the vehicle back, but then asking questions. The questions suggested that Constable Bent had asked Nick Beaton. Well, he had to keep the phone because he wanted to check her phone. That is because he wanted to check to see, if there was any evidence there that might help them figure out what happened. And he had asked whether the possibility that Kristen Beaton may have known the killer. They're trying to figure out why he was killing certain people and not everybody else. But Nick Beaton was very offended by this. I think understood the suggestion to be, well, maybe there was an intimate relationship there. Later, Constable Bent tried to clarify that no, he just meant any kind of a relationship, work, association, whatever. But at one point, Nick Beaton got up and was yelling. You could hear this over the live stream. That you're under oath up there, and he was quite vocal. I think his mother as well, but mostly Nick Beaton. And Commissioner MacDonald told him to be quiet. He didn't, and then the commission took a break and came back. And when they came back, Michael Scott indicated he had no more questions, and so they were going on to the next lawyer. But then Nick Beaton got up again because Constable Bent tried to then clarify what he meant. He wasn't trying to allude or suggest that there was any kind of an intimate relationship, just asking the question if there was any kind of a relationship, which, asked in the right way, certainly would be a fair question when you don't know anything about the circumstances. But you can understand a husband being offended by any kind of suggestion like that as well. Michael Scott was in a delicate position there, and it's a tough spot for the lawyer. I mean, you're an officer of the court, so you want to, make sure everybody maintains decorum. You always tell your client if there's the decision's coming down or anything like that, don't say anything, don't make an outburst. However, you also don't want to take sides against your client. It's their case, it's their life, and if they want to make an outburst or yell at the judge or the commissioner, in this case, it's not a court, then, so be it. That's up to them. Sometimes, in fact, it's good to let them go a little bit, go on for a little bit, and let the commissioners in this case, the judge in other cases, and the public in this case, understand the level of frustration that has built up and understand, what these people are going through. So it can be very powerful if it's deployed rarely. Okay, so there was that. There were two outbursts, one before the break and then one after, when Constable Bent tried to sort of explain what he was trying to say earlier. So that was that was a little drama in the afternoon. Then, it seemed like things were kind of winding down a little bit, but there was this other presentation, and it was a very important presentation as it turned out, which was public communications from the RCMP and the government. I'll have to read the foundational document. I believe it's been posted now to the website, and I'll read this. So there's no proceedings tomorrow. There is Thursday. I might come back with more comments on this after I read this in more in depth, but these were public communications from the RCMP and the government. So this was sort of senior level RCMP communications. So the press conferences that were held in Nova Scotia, interviews that Commissioner Lucki did, Brenda Lucki, and some of the issues involved there. So the presentation started off talking about how the RCMP generally does public communications, and they try to avoid there's all kinds of privacy concerns. They can't even say that people are related. They have to just say known to each other. They can't say domestic violence. They have to say, a woman in a house assaulted by a man. They can't interfere with an active investigation. All these considerations that they feel they need to, they need to have in mind. But there's some very misleading things that took place. So the initial tweet after Gabriel Wortman was shot and killed by Constable Hewley, the video which we can all see now, the initial tweet by the RCMP said that Wortman was taken into custody. Well, he was dead. They knew that too, that he was dead, and they didn't say that. Then the first press conference, it was Chief Superintendent Chris Leather said that there were more than 10 fatalities. First of all, right away, they didn't even say anything about civilians. They only talked about Constable Heidi Stevenson's death. When they got asked a question whether there was anybody else involved, then Chief Superintendent Leather says, yes, more than 10. Well, they knew already at that point that there was at least 17 people killed. The most damaging part, though, is this other, Commissioner Lucki was pressuring the Nova Scotia RCMP to release the details on the firearms that the gunman used during the shooting spree. And the reason for this pressure was she had promised Prime Minister Trudeau and Public Safety Minister Bill Blair that she would. And the reason she promised that was that they wanted it to be used to support their gun legislation, firearms control legislation, in which they were going to be banning certain types of firearms, including at least one that the perpetrator had. The issue with this is he never had a license. He never bought them legitimately. They were bought illegally, smuggled in over the U.S.-Canadian border, and possessed illegally. So, banning them from legal possession isn't going to fix that. So that was an issue as well, a big issue, and I'm sure Commissioner Lucki is going to have to be answering for that sooner rather than later, hopefully. I mean, she's set to testify, I think, later in the summer, but hard to imagine this issue lingering that long without her saying something. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if the Prime Minister's asked about this as well. So then other things that they got wrong or were misleading. I mean, they said that they only learned about the replica vehicle in the morning. They say key details on it, but the suggestion was that they only learned that it was a replica RCMP vehicle in the morning of the 19th, when we all now know that that was information that was provided almost immediately to the police by Andrew McDonald. And then the last press briefing was the 28th of April, 2020, and there's been nothing since. So really not much information coming from the RCMP in any form. So really this is, self-inflicted damage on their part. They knew the facts. They wouldn't communicate them accurately. They weren't forthcoming with details. At one point there was a comment that Superintendent Campbell, I think, said that he thought that an Amber Alert was issued but had to be corrected, that no, it was sent out by Twitter and Facebook. So Lots of issues with the RCMP communications. Many of those things we're aware of. The big news out of today, though, is that Commissioner Lucki was trying to pressure the RCMP into releasing details on the firearms at the behest of the Prime Minister and politicizing the tragedy in the early days. So we'll see what the fallout of that might be. Like I said, no proceedings tomorrow. There will be proceedings Thursday. It's going to be a roundtable discussion on interoperability among agencies, communications among agencies, which isn't quite clear exactly what that'll cover, but we'll see. And then an expert report on supporting survivors, and so we'll hear from somebody about that. All right, so an interesting day as it turned out, and so we'll be back on Thursday. In the meantime, thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with a friend, and we'll see you next time.